Have you been unleashed?
Unleashed.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Horizon Advisors Unleashed podcast. Andrew Hendricks here again, haven't left. Excited for another great topic today. We have a little unique spin on the podcast today. We'll be doing a little bit of a book review, which we haven't done before. For a great book, very insightful, knowledgeable book on a lot of the themes and topics that we talk about on this podcast. So I'm excited for it. Again, Ryan, Cuss, what's going on?
Hey, good afternoon, everybody.
Welcome back. It's an exciting week, not just because of this podcast, because you can see how excited we are about it. But I am leaving for my honeymoon tomorrow in Italy, which is very exciting. I have not been to Italy, and it is going to be quite the trip. I get to add another pin to my world map. Been fortunate to do a lot of world travel in my life, which I'm very passionate about. Italy has not been one of them yet. I have heard nothing but great things, so I'm very excited to be relaxing with my wife, and going to be in a great time to restart, refresh, and come back hungry and ready to roll. Because you know how much we talk about that on this podcast, right?
Got to recharge.
Beautiful thing is, ironically and coincidentally, Ryan sitting next to me will also be in Italy at the same time for your stepsister's wedding?
Stepsister's wedding, yeah.
Just ended up working out that way that I'll be in Tuscany and he'll be in Tuscany for a wedding and I'll be in Tuscany for my honeymoon at the same time.
So random.
So we'll meet up for a drink or something and maybe talk about the book even further.
Yeah.
So that's an exciting trip. Hopefully we'll have a nice podcast review for that too. But getting back to the subject at hand, we're going to be talking about the book Exploring the Psychology of Money, which is written by Morgan Housel. And I wanted to, on the book cover, there's a phrase that I wanted to also mention. And it says, timeless lessons on wealth, greed, and happiness. Wealth, greed, and happiness. So there's like positive words and negative words all like kind of mixed in there, which is nice. I think it ties into the theme of volatility too, because greed would be a negative connotation, right? But wealth and happiness would be positive ones, which a lot of the time with wealth and happiness and greed, they are all connected, but they're also like part of that roller coaster along the way. But you know, what we wanted to talk about today is really some of the kind of key principles and some of the concepts that Morgan speaks about in the book, because ultimately kind of the overarching holistic kind of overview of this is the very complex nature that exists. I would maybe even call it tension between, like behavioral finance psychology, right? Us as humans, how we deal with things, how we manage things, and money, simply put. Because there are a lot of factors out there that impact your financial decision making. A lot of them are, again, behavioral, like we've said. Some of them are inherent or, just part of your nature. People deal with money completely differently than others. And it has nothing to do with education or maybe how you were brought up, and all these things do impact it, certainly. But sometimes, is my point, is that it's just who you are as a person. How you deal with money can be just an inherent habitual thing, that does impact ultimately some of the other things, right? Like how you were brought up, education, what business you're in, what you do for a living, single or married, kids, no kids, right? All these different factors. That's all over here. But really just dealing with you as a person, and, kind of, comparing that to some of the real world examples that we see out there and kind of just combining it all together. So again, welcome back to the first book review or summary, I guess, podcast.
Yeah,
So,
I think we're going to do more of these.
yeah, it's a good thing. We do like to educate and read here. That's one of the big things we do at Horizon Advisors, as you've known from other podcasts too. So psychology, let's take a step back and let's just talk about psychology before we even connect it to finance and money. and I guess how it relates. That'd be the second point, is how psychology, after we get there, how that relates to finance and money. So I guess again, I'll spin it over to you. I know how it summarizes kind of in the book, but in terms of psychology, when you hear the word psychology, I mean, the first thing I think of is a college class.
Definitely. I mean, everybody probably took that class.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I always think it's kind of like how the brain works, how people think, and why people behave in a certain way. Analyzing that down to the details. I mean, it could be, how you're raised, like Andrew. It could be a chemical imbalance in your brain. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can swing psychology, but I think overall, it's kind of like how the study of the brain and how people.
Yeah, I think I always related it back. I always thought psychology was philosophy. Philosophy was psychology, one of the two. But they're similar, I guess.
Sociology.
They're similar in some degree. But a lot of probably philosophical type of, philosophies, for lack of a better word, that were in that class probably had a lot to do with psychology too, just in terms of some of the ways people were thinking and what they thought at the time, of those principles. And yeah, I would say again, psychology, again, a good way to phrase it. We're not psychologists or doctors or PhDs or anything like that in this space. So if you are one, please don't lament us for how we phrase it. But I would say it the right, that way, same way. Psychology is the way, I think of it as the way people think, and how that thinking drives them to make decisions or do whatever they do. Right? It could be an action, it could be a decision, it could be a conversation, it could be anything, how they feel about something, because it all kind of stems back to their brain and how they're feeling about something or how they think about it. And that's kind of the way I look at it. I always think of it as psychology is in my head, when I see like a picture, if I could phrase it, it'd be like a silhouette of a head with like the thinking kind of things above it, right? That's kind of the way I think of it. And again, that's because of what it is. So, if we kind of tie that into finance, and this does differ, again, in the book, it relates to this too. Like if you are I think a seasoned investor or a novice investor, or something along those lines, that's kind of the connection there. Obviously that's different, is how you've handled it. If you have experience, you're a seasoned investor, you've battled through ups and downs, you've battled through different trends, different market cycles, all those things, and you've maybe changed along the way or changed your habits or changed the way you think about it, versus how novice investors, or maybe someone that hasn't done it as frequently or as much or as long as somebody else, and how they view things.
I also think, with the psychology and money, you go through different phases of your life, and each phase is kind of different, has different goals, things like that. And I think, one place a lot of people struggle is, when you are entering those new phases, it's like a whole new way of thinking. And a lot of people struggle there.
They do. And again, that relates to some of the themes and topics we'll talk about in a second. But since we're kind of speaking, at least in the beginning of this podcast, I want to speak specifically on how it relates to an investor. And then there's going to be some other things we talk about that are really just more perspectives on other themes within the financial world and how you deal with money. But when you talk about an investor as a whole, when you talk about behavioral finance, which we'll touch on in a few minutes here, but you look at the trends and the data that supports people getting in and out of the market, when they think they can time it, when they think something's going to happen, and sometimes you can be right, sometimes you can be wrong. I would probably say majority of the time, from a novice investor, that you don't do it. You're not an analyst. You don't do it for a living. You're not doing this for your career. Majority of the time, the data points that you're wrong. You can get lucky and that can be great, but majority of the data shows you can be wrong, because there's a lot of great data out there from our research analysts and the companies out there like Morningstar, and some of the other great companies out there that provide a lot of data that shows that people that try to get in and out of the market when times are good, right, and then in times are bad. And an example would be of people selling out in 2022 when all the market was having the worst year since 2008. They sold out, but then
I know I got some of those calls.
Yeah, we did. And then they want to get back in 2023 once the market started rebounding and going back up. they want to get back in. Well, even if you did that perfectly, which is impossible, let's just say you would just be flat in that sense because you sold it at the high and then you waited for it to come back and you got back in. You'd be flat. And actually the data shows the majority of the time that's not what happens because there's a lot of data points along the way where if you miss some of those best days or some of those worst days, that your rate of return or whatever, on some of the certain indexes is drastically different because you try to time the market. But that's kind of like the psychology of like more of the novice investor is trying to, when the pain is getting hurt, you're feeling the bleeding, you're feeling the pain, you want it to stop, right? That's part of the, the mental thinking is that you want to get out.
And I think a big, on the opposite side, people hear stories from friends, the news, whatever your sources are, where someone had success in a stock or an investment, and now all of a sudden you want to jump in because other people are in it, other people are making money, you're not.
Mm-hmm. And you feel left out. It's like the FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. And it's also a good point because it's kind of related to in the text too. But when you think about also the people that you surround yourself with, and you talk about fear of missing out on some of these other things, it is a lot of the time people out there talk about their wins and not their not their losses, right? So just like how they do with like gambling, and I'm not relating investing to gambling because it is very different, but just like if you just look at the concept alone, just like how people are like, oh, I picked, whoever to win the Super Bowl. I put $1,000 on them in the beginning. I knew they were going to win. Oh, look at that. I was right. Well, they're going to talk to you about that versus maybe the 10, 11 bets they made along the way of certain games that they all lost because they didn't pick it right. There is a similarity to that in terms of psychology and money when it comes to investing as well. Again, just from a concept perspective, there might be, oh, I invested in this stock, I invested in this thing, or my lady told me to do this and it worked out very well. And then you tell your neighbor that, and the neighbor's like, oh, well, my guy, my lady, or I didn't do that if they manage their own, whatever. And then they're like, oh, I should have done this. Well, first of all, that's hindsight. Secondly, it's recency bias. And third, who knows if that was even suitable for you. But that psychology of the money and the way you think about it is, oh, well, I missed out on that, right?
Yeah.
I didn't do,
It's a real feeling.
I got to get in now because it's going to, and sometimes that doesn't work out either. But that's sometimes the way people think because money has a certain control over us where if you feel like you're not winning, you might feel like you have to make a change or you have to do something about it just because of the way we think. Disciplined, seasoned investors might have already learned that the hard way and have battled through it, or they've just stayed in long enough where they see the ups and downs and how it sways, and if they can have almost like an avoidance to it, but an avoidance in a good way, because there's some financial avoidance that's very bad and negative, but if almost like they have an avoidance and they take the emotion out of it, that a lot of the time that can work out to be a better thing. And that does have to do with psychology because the way you think about it, being able to ride through the volatility, it does change. So, and it changes your outlook and it changes how you manage it. So one of the biggest things, again, in the book they talk about is the personal experiences and how it happens with money. We'll give a couple examples because there's ones in many different ways, right? Let's say, you were in a situation where as a kid, you had a parent, mom or dad, who was a business owner and, maybe it was doing very, very well and they were doing very well, but then something happened and maybe their industry was no longer needed. It went down over time, technology assumed over and something happened, whatever it is. And then maybe the business fails or it tanks or something happens. And no longer you went from like the high of, being maybe very financially stable and very financially well off to now something happened, the business is gone, someone passed away, whatever it is. And now you're struggling and money's going to run out or whatever happened, right? That might lead you to be more cautious, right? If you were a kid at that time and you saw the ups and downs of that financial situation for you and your parents and what the impact of that happened to your family, that might lean you to be a little bit more restrictive, a little bit more not as open, and maybe a little bit more cautious about the money. You could relate that in many different ways. It could have been you had a stock or something, or an investment, or a company you put a lot of money, or someone invested a lot of money into, and then it failed. They lost all that money. You might be now reluctant, right, to do that again, right, because of that feeling. On the flip side, another example would be if maybe you came from a situation with a lot of wealth and it continued, and you had a lot of wealth and you came from a successful family. So money's just always been really a second fiddle. You've always kind of had it. You've always didn't have to worry about it. So you didn't have to save. You could just spend and do whatever you want. Well, you might look at money as, okay, well, if I lose it, whatever. And you might just be investing all into speculative, risky things on the hope that it hits a home run. And if you lose, you're like, okay, whatever. It's almost like a high for you. Those types of upbringings and those types of situations can change your own psychology of money and how it relates to wealth, happiness, and greed, ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, I look at how I was raised. I had to work for everything. I got stuff from my parents, but if I wanted, to do things or buy things beyond that, I had to work, go buy those things, save money for them, try to get the best deals so I could save as little as possible to go get those things. And you look at those disciplines that, you build during that time because of the way you grow up, again, those type of people are going to probably continue those types of disciplines. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But I think you're more likely to probably do that. And then on the flip side, if you're a kid that's been handed everything, a chunk of those people, might not have some of those disciplines when they get into their adulthood and, they start taking care of their own finances. And you'll always get the people on either side. But I guess at the point, the way you're raised, if you never see money and you live poor and you see struggle your whole life, sometimes it might even be hard to burst through and create success for yourself.
Yeah, it's almost like people who break the wheel or they stay on the status quo, and it goes on both fronts. Like what Ryan just mentioned, you have a situation where if you came from a maybe not as wealthy upbringing, maybe you were poor. There's two types of people out there, and again, it's how you think about money. You either have the one that says, I'm stuck in this position. This is what I'm used to. This is what I know. I'm never going to have a lot of money. This is the life I know. This is how it is. And it worked for our family. And so you just keep that status quo. Or you have someone that maybe wants to try to break the wheel and say, I did grow up poor. I don't want this life. I'm going to do whatever I can to make a bunch of money and be super successful. Same flip side as if you came from a very wealthy family. You might look at it and say, I'm checked out. We have a bunch of money. I'm good. I'm going to be fine. Family wealth will take care of me, whatever it is. And then you just kind of coast and you're doing whatever. Or you have some people, you look at that and you say, wow, the situation that I'm in, extremely lucky. I'm very blessed to be in that situation. I want to compound it. I want to do everything I can to make it even more, or even bring even more success because of the fortune and luck that I've had to be put in this position. Look what I can do with all of that and make it even better, right? So on both fronts, you have all these different mindsets, and it ultimately really does probably depend on how you were raised in those situations, right? Either being inspired by your parents to, you're going to break this wheel and you're going to get us out of this situation, you're going to be the person, or the flip side of that and saying, were you brought up more just giving everything, like, an example Ryan gave, and maybe it doesn't relate.
Or you
that
get
way.
a good mentor. I mean,
yeah.
I think what I've learned in life is behaviors are, they're pretty hard to change. If you have certain behaviors to you, it takes an extreme amount of discipline, being self-conscious, like paying attention to what's going on to change a behavior. I mean, you look at training a dog, if a dog is, barking at the door, chewing up shoes, or, doing things that you don't want it to do. I mean, you got to spend a lot of time with that dog teaching to change those behaviors so that, the dog does what you want it to do ultimately. It takes time and effort.
And it's a great, it's like kind of like classical conditioning, and sometimes habits are built that way is by that constant reassurance and training to eventually get to the point where you act the way that you want to act, or the dog acts, right? Same thing. Um, and and when you look at it from a financial perspective, these different mindsets, these different upbringings, or these different situations can have not only the implication of what you're trying to do with money, your goal of money, but that ultimately has an impact on, do you save money or do you spend it all, right? Do you invest it, or, just hoard cash because you're afraid of investing, right? Then you start, dwindling down into the nitty gritty of all that stuff. And that's where behavioral finance gets involved. The one thing I'll say, they talk about behavioral finance a lot in the book, and there's a couple that we'll talk about. I will say, by just, from passing my CFP designation back in March of 24, and going through that process, behavioral finance is a huge topic on the exam. It's not as much so as it was in the past. From the study and from the lectures and the professors and stuff that I taught and did my reviews, they all of them said the CFP board and everything has a bigger, stronger focus on behavioral finance. So there was more questions on those, and some of the same topics, the same behavioral finance terms in the book were used even on the CFP exam. So we'll give a three common ones that were spoken about, and not that one is bigger or more important than the other, but these are, maybe I would say, what you could argue are the most common, which would be loss aversion, overconfidence, and herd behavior. And we kind of touched on all three of those kind of throughout this conversation, but to address them more closely, loss aversion is just how it sounds. You avoid things because you don't want to lose, right? That's what you're trying to do. So you're not going to do this, even though maybe it might be suitable for your plan, long-term, whatever it is, but just because there is the potential of a loss in any piece of it, which way, you leave it, you avoid it, right? Because you want to get rid of that. It also can relate sometimes where maybe you have felt some loss, and now that loss has been stuck in your mind and you're not going to let it happen again. So again, you remove yourself from that situation.
Yeah, overconfidence. I mean, you see that a lot when the markets are doing well. You can buy a stock. Every stock you buy seems to go up. You're in a good market. You start getting confident, or maybe you're really good at something in your job, and because you're very successful at business, now you think you can do any type of business or buy into any type of business. So, overconfidence a lot of times comes from having some success, early success, and then, having a self-belief, I guess, that's going to continue for you and everything that you do is going to do well. And, that can lead to problems if you get a little too aggressive, or, you just become too overconfident.
Yeah, I mean that's the best way to put it. And then in the realm of just investing specifically, overconfidence is just, simply put, let's say you bought a stock or an investment, whatever it is, and it did very, very well for you, and it was your idea, you picked it, you did the analysis, so boom, you won, good for you. Well, now you're taking that to the other decisions or whatever investments you're considering now, and you're going to go all in, you're going to go do that because, oh, well, look what I did here. It worked. I did this analysis. I'm doing the same thing this time, and I see the same outcome, so I'm going to go do it. That is overconfidence, because those are two unrelated things.
You may not be trained to make those decisions. A lot of people, I think, don't even do any research at all. They just buy something, they win, and then that gives them confidence. Hey, I can do this, and then they go make the next one, and then
I think in the when you read it and you kind of read through the examples, sometimes overconfidence, I even think, can be related to complacency. And, the way you look at that is, you've done well, or you did well, and you're succeeding, whichever way you gauge success in whatever
you're good
topic.
now.
But now you're good, so you're not going to try as hard, or you're not going to do right. Overconfidence can sometimes even be related to that, even though they're different subjects. But if you think about it, if you you won before, and now you think, oh, now all I'm going to do is just win. Well, that is some sort of form of complacency, because you're just expecting that that's how it goes and that you're good. That's not the case, and a lot of time, again, that's a very poor behavioral finance attitude to have, because it doesn't happen that way. And then finally, there's a lot of good ones, but herd behavior, again, probably know what that is just based on the term itself, but you follow the herd, right? So if someone tells you, if your group of friends or your business partners, your colleagues, your employees, whatever else, they're all doing something, and then you're following along because everyone's doing it, right? It's the classic phrase, that cliche phrase, well, if someone jumped off a bridge, would you follow them? That is what herd behavior is. Everyone's investing in this thing, this next thing. Everyone's buying it. Oh, you got to do it. It's a big deal. So you follow along without doing any due diligence, without asking if it's, the analysis or going through, is it suitable for you? Does it make sense for your plan?
Is the timing right anymore?
All that stuff. Yeah, the timing could be a thing. Maybe it did well because of a certain trend that just happened, and now it's not going to do as well. There's a lot of ways that you can get hurt by that too. And so recognizing those things, again, some of the stuff that the book talks about is being able to recognize and giving some advice on how you can recognize them, but then also the solution to beat them or overcome those behavioral finance biases that you have. Because that can be a huge factor into the success or the failure of your financial plan, is being able to address and overcome those biases, which we see all the time, all the time with the plans. Sometimes overcoming those biases is by removing yourself from the situation.
I totally agree with that. I think also a big part of changing the behaviors is being honest with yourself and, asking yourself these questions. Am I doing this? Do I really even know what I'm doing? Why am I doing this? And I think, if most people were honest with themselves, then now you have a foundation to, if you don't like what you're doing and you're being honest about it, now you can start making a path to change and try to get into a better behavior.
And I agree. And sometimes that is what you have to do. And it's also, like Ryan said, if you're honest with yourself, you can be able to hopefully make those decisions. Some of the other topics or themes in the book that they talk about, again, is a lot of the stuff that we talk about on this podcast before, which is the long-term thinking, patience. Everyone wants to buy the next big thing and for it to pop right away, and you're winning and it's all great. Everyone wants to win money, and all those things are great, and if it happens, great, but it's not realistic to expect that every time and all the time. It doesn't happen. And a lot of time it's the long term that wins over the span of life, rather than the grand slams right away. It's the singles and the doubles that win you over the long span of time. And the way, the book kind of talks about, the compounding interest effect and compounding growth, and it has some case studies and stuff to talk about how that works. But, a simple one is really just to look at, the S&P index over time. Depending on when you look at it, it's 6, 7, 8% of an average annualized return, somewhere in there. And, that compounds over time, right? So that's not just simple. It's not simple interest. It's not, if you put $100,000 into the S&P and it got 6% or something, that first year you'd have made $6,000. But now if it went up 6 again the next year, you got 6% on 106,000, not 6% on 100,000, right? So it compounds that way, and then you factor in if you're contributing and all these different factors, right? And it goes up and down, doesn't always go up, but if you're consistently contributing or consistently rebalancing and some of these other things, well, you're buying in at those lows if it went down the next year. And then if it goes back up, well, then you recovered your money from the year before, plus the money that went in at the low got back, and that helps your compounding growth. So, that's a strategy for patience.
Patience is a tough one. I mean, we could have a whole podcast on that.
And the book talks about it a lot, but patience really is a big factor in the psychology of money. And they also relate to, again, a lot of the greed that comes from money is because of the lack of patience, right? trying to cut corners, trying to win big, trying to do something shady or
Think
illegal.
the grass is greener.
Doing something like that's wrong. Doing something that's wrong, trying to cut corners for the greed to try to get ahead. Because ultimately that really does stem from not being patient, right? You could have a long-term outlook and believe in those things, and then you're like, oh, no, I want it now. Well, that's when greed starts to creep in, right?
I even, not related to investments, you see a lot of, I think, lack of patience, in career mode now. People that are willing to jump to another company, for something that they find as an immediate benefit, but, if they were more patient, in their career path, if they took more time, they might see the grass isn't always greener by, just taking a hop to make a couple more bucks or to go, take a certain type of action. I mean, you got to really be patient, and then when you look at business owners like us, I mean, that's probably the toughest part of being a business owner is being patient. A lot of people enter and get into a business thinking that they're going to make good money right away or they're going to do really great. And not too many businesses get that immediate explosion where they're just successful right away. You got to be patient, got to put the work in. You got to let it take the time, build your skills, build your clients, all that.
Yeah, most of the time it doesn't. Doesn't work that way. Is being successful right away. It does take a lot of time, and
yeah, you're lucky almost if you're successful right away.
There's a discipline and a motivation combination of those two factors that with the combination of patience involved that gets you to that long-term goal. I guess on the book itself to kind of conclude, the podcast here. This is something that we speak about also again on many podcasts, and it kind of talks about like what is enough, right? That's kind of like the subject is what is deemed enough, and ultimately what role that question plays for people's psychology of money.
It's a tough one. I know people that have asked that question their whole life, and they're in their 60s and 70s.
Well, and this relates to a lot of things again that talks about, which is pressures. It could be pressure from family. It could be pressures from friends. It could be pressures just from your community or society. It could be, like again, we always say the keeping up with the Joneses, right? That's the phrase, right? That's kind of relating to is, do you have these pressures or do you don't have that pressure, right? Do you have the pressure of you have to be super successful, you have to be worth a lot of money, you have to do those things? Well, that might lead to greed. That might lead to, that bad things.
The pursuit of money, and you're not, pursuing the happiness part of your life.
Mm-hmm. Which is, again, you talk about wealth, greed, and happiness, right? So, the happiness piece, I believe, comes to when you talk about this question of enough, the happiness comes to whether or not you have a fair expectation or you're honest. Again, going back to what we said, you're honest with yourself on what the happiness really is for you. Is it being the most wealthy, most financial, biggest balance sheet, net worth, whatever that you could possibly maximize in your life? Is that what makes you happy? Or is it getting to a certain point and then being happy with your work-life balance and you're fine with your life and that's it? Or is it
experiences?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things, but that question is such a heavy loaded question because it's one of the hardest ones to answer for everybody. The easy answer is to say, oh yeah, I want to make a lot of money, or I just want to be happy, right? These are the cliche answers, or I just want to have enough to live my life. Well, those can be good answers, but ultimately that doesn't really answer the question of, is that enough? Are you actually truly happy in that regard? Because what are the things that make you happy? It's probably not making money. A lot of the time it's not.
It's not material things most of the time.
No, it's other things. It's maybe a relationship, having kids, having experiences, having friends, working with people you like. It could be completely non-financial things that actually truly make you happy, but it's disguised by money. Or money is the goal that disguises everything else. But a lot of people see, which you've probably heard on many other famous celebrities, podcasts, interviews, whatever, that a lot of the time the money did nothing for them. They weren't happy. They made bad decisions. They didn't like what they were doing. They hated themselves.
Turned them into a different person.
Yeah, and then lost friends, lost family, isolated themselves. That happens a lot. On the flip side, yeah, there's a lot of positive stories too, of people who have been very successful, made a lot of money, and they've done the right things with that actually truly gives them happiness. Which again, if you listen to those people, a lot of the time they say that money is not what gives you happiness. And you could sit there and say, oh, well, it's easy for them to say because they're rich and they have a lot of money. But if you look at what they're doing with their life and what they do, you can see that they are actually happy, and they used the success and the wealth that they made to do the things that actually make them happy. There's a lot of those stories out there too. But that's why, they talk about this, the pressure of what is enough. And the book kind of alludes to, some tips and some advice on, how to get to that satisfaction and what that means for you, and how it relates to, again, the wealth part, the greed part, and the happiness part, and finding the balance between those, it is very important to the ultimate, your happiness, your success, and also how you think about money.
Yeah, I think that's the key, what you just said, the balance of all that.
It's hard to find.
Yeah.
Very hard to find.
You got to work at it.
Many people struggle with it. But yeah, if you think about any of these things, or any of these topics related to you, or you heard about these and you're like, want to know more, I mean, it's a very interesting book, insightful book, knowledgeable book. So go ahead and check it out.
We can talk to you about these kind of things.
Yeah, we talk about people about this all the time. I mean, a lot of our job, again, and I go back to the CFP and stuff that they were testing you on, training you on, is because you have to, as a professional, as a fiduciary, some of our role is to find out those biases if you can't find them out for yourself, is asking the right questions, probing for the right questions, so that I can understand, or we can understand, how you feel about these certain things, and how you feel about money, and how this would impact you if this happened or that happened, because that does drive decision making, and it does ultimately change the way you think about money, which is the psychology of money. And that's the book title again, Psychology of Money, Timeless Lessons on Wealth, Greed, and Happiness, Morgan Housel. Check it out. I know it's on Amazon. But, if any of this related to you, again, come talk to us, talk to a professional, read the book, see if it can help. A lot of great tips and advice and insight in there on some cool things on how all this relates to money, which is always interesting and cool to see. So thanks again for listening. We'll see you back again. And cheers. Ryan Cuss, President and Financial Planner. Alexander Dinzer, Managing Director and Financial Planner. Andrew Henricks, Financial Planner. Securities and advisory services offered through Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, member FINRA/SIPC, a broker-dealer and registered investment advisor. Cetera is under separate ownership from any other named entity. Tax planning services offered by Horizon Advisors. Tax and accounting services provided by Horizon Advisors CPA. Cetera Advisor Networks does not provide tax nor accounting services. For a comprehensive review of your personal situation, always consult with a tax or legal advisor. Neither Cetera Advisor Networks LLC nor any of its representatives may give legal or tax advice. The views stated in this podcast are not necessarily the opinion of Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities. Due to volatility within the markets, opinions are subject to change without notice. Information is based on sources believed to be reliable. However, their accuracy or completeness cannot be guaranteed. Past performance does not guarantee future results. Investors cannot invest directly in indexes. The performance of any index is not indicative of the performance of any investment and does not take into account the effects of inflation and the fees and expenses associated with investing. A diversified portfolio does not assure a profit or protect against loss in a declining market. All investing involves risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will be successful. Distributions from traditional IRAs and employer-sponsored retirement plans are taxed as ordinary income and, if taken prior to reaching age 59.5, may be subject to an additional 10% IRS tax penalty. Converting from a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA is a taxable event. A Roth IRA offers tax-free withdrawals on taxable contributions. To qualify for the tax-free and penalty-free withdrawal of earnings, a Roth IRA must be in place for at least 5 tax years, and the distribution must take place after age 59 and a half or due to death, disability, or a first-time home purchase, up to a $10,000 lifetime maximum. Depending on state law, Roth IRA distributions may be subject to state taxes. Investing in mutual funds is subject to risk and loss of principal. There is no assurance or certainty that any investment strategy will be successful in meeting its objectives. Exchange-traded fund and mutual funds are sold by prospectus only. Investors should consider the investment objectives, risks, and charges and expenses of the mutual fund or ETF carefully before investing. The prospectus contains this and other information about the product. Contact Alexander Dinzer at 5455 Corporate Drive, Suite 306, Troy, Michigan, 48098 or 248-265-6662 to obtain a prospectus, which should be read carefully before investing or sending money. Horizon Advisors, 5455 Corporate Drive, Suite 306, Michigan, 48098.